Yo, what is up guys, Lolsano here. And today's video is pretty interesting. We're going to be talking about how much money Deepwoken has made. I'm going to be making a lot of assumptions and using a lot of calculations and inferences from the past in order to derive this number. This video is going to be very math heavy, but I'm going to be trying to explain it in a way that makes sense to everybody. I did do a lot of research for this video, so I would appreciate it if you guys subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Alright, so like all things money related, this is a pretty interesting topic, and I'm sure nearly everyone is curious to get a better idea as to how much money the Deepwoken dev team has made so far. One of the first videos I did on my channel was actually the same thing, but for Rogue Lineage. I estimated how much money Rogue Lineage made. Archmage actually answered some of the questions that I had about the game's finances himself, which was great. By using some of the figures that Archmage revealed to me, we can make some inferences as to how many game sales Deepwoken has done and how much revenue it's made since its release. So to provide some context as to the information that we do have, let me go over the Rogue Lineage's finances first, so that we can use those numbers to make some inferences about Deepwoken. So back then I asked straight up if he could just tell me how much money Rogue Lineage made, and he didn't do that, but he did help me figure it out. He mentioned that I could use the developer API to figure out how many sales the game got, but if you try and use API for a paid access game, it doesn't actually tell you the amount of sales the game got unless you're the developer. API, from what I'm aware, is where Roblox stores the data for games and transactions. Archmage checked the data, and he told me that the game had 730,419 sales. Rogue Lineage was 350 Robux paid access, so you multiply that number by 350, and Roblox takes a 30% tax, so you multiply that number by 0.7. Doing this calculation will give you the amount of Robux that Rogue Lineage made. The game made 178,952,655 Robux from paid access alone. Now, Robux is obviously not real money, it's not going to pay the bills, so you've got to convert that to dollars. The Roblox exchange rate is 1 Robux to $0.0035. Accounting for this, Rogue Lineage made $626,334 from paid access sales. Now, there's a huge flaw in just using this number and taking that as the main inference for Deepwoken sales, because paid access sales are not even where the majority of the profit comes from for Rogue Lineage. For Rogue Lineage, the majority of the profit comes from race rerolls, because people always want to get the rerolls for the races that they wanted. Archmage estimates that around a third of the profit comes from paid access sales, so if we take the number that we got for the amount of money that paid access made, and then multiply that by 3, we should get a good idea as to how much money Rogue Lineage made in total. Doing this calculation, we can see that Rogue Lineage made just under $2 million, and since this calculation was done nearly 8 months ago, I think it's fair to say that Rogue Lineage has definitely made over $2 million. Okay, now we know the finances of Rogue Lineage, let's talk about how that relates to Deepwoken, and see if we can do similar calculations for the game. For Rogue Lineage, we know exactly how many sales the game has gotten, and how many visits the game has gotten. Visits are a public data that anyone can see. For Deepwoken, we don't know how many sales the game has gotten, but we do know how many visits it's gotten. If we assume that the ratio at which Rogue Lineage game owners visit Rogue Lineage is the same as the ratio at which Deepwoken owners visit Deepwoken, then we can actually figure out how many game owners there are for Deepwoken. Now, there are some pretty huge flaws in this assumption. First is that, we don't know that this ratio would be the same. People just may like Deepwoken more in general, and then visit the game more, compared to Rogue Lineage, but we don't really know this, there's no way of telling. So by assuming that these two figures are going to be the same, we kind of are making a huge assumption. But like in most models, assumptions are a necessary evil. You want to avoid them as much as possible, but when they're necessary, just use them. We should get a decent estimate. It may not be completely accurate, but it should be somewhere near the right answer. So Archmage said that Rogue Lineage had 730,419 game sales. By looking at the public data, we can see that the game has 282.6 million visits. So you may think we just divide the amount of visits by the amount of game sales, right? But that would be wrong, because that was actually the amount of game sales that the game had 8 months ago. The game has without a doubt got much more sales since then. Since we have no way of telling how many game sales the game has gotten since then, our best bet is to go back and see how many visits the game had at that time, and then we can find a more accurate ratio. I scoured the Rogue Lineage Discord around that time where Archmage posted the game sale numbers to see if there was any mention of the word visits, and this guy said that at the time, Rogue Lineage had 233 million visits. So now we have accurate sale numbers and accurate visit numbers. Let's find the ratio as to which someone who owns Rogue Lineage would actually play the game. By dividing 233 million by 730,000, we can see that the average person on Rogue Lineage visits the game 319 times. Now, to estimate Deepwoken's game sales, we simply take the amount of visits, which is 91.5 million, and divide that by 319. This calculation gives us an estimate that Deepwoken has sold 286,833 copies. However, there's a pretty big discrepancy that we haven't mentioned that makes it so that I can't use this number straight up, and that is the time in which Rogue Lineage is up versus the time in which Deepwoken is up. Rogue Lineage has been out for 3 years, and Deepwoken has only been out for 3 months. Since Rogue Lineage has been out for so much longer, I'd assume that the average player on Rogue Lineage has visited the game a lot more, because there's a lot more time for them to visit the game. This could be 10 times more, it could be 2 times more, it could be 5 times more. I'm gonna go with a pretty conservative estimate, which is that the average Rogue Lineage player visited the game 2 times more than the average Deepwoken player. Now, what this means for our data is that instead of dividing by 319 visits, we have to divide by half of that. Our new calculation is that Deepwoken has gotten 573,668 game sales. Now, if we multiply this number by 400, which is the selling price for Deepwoken, and then by 0.7 to account for Roblox's tax, we get this number. By this estimate, Deepwoken has made 160,626,959 Robux from game sales alone. We then need to multiply that by 0.0035, which is the exchange rate, and we come up with the estimation that Deepwoken has made $562,000 from game sales. Now, obviously we aren't done here, because like Rogue Lineage, the majority of Deepwoken's profit does not come from game sales, that's only a portion of it. For Rogue Lineage, like Archmage said, the ratio of profit from game sales to the actual rest of transactions was 1 to 3, so for Rogue Lineage we just multiplied it by 3. But this would not work for Deepwoken, as the transactions are completely different. The majority of Deepwoken's profit comes from people buying slots, character slots. I hosted a poll on my YouTube channel, and I asked people how many slots they bought on Deepwoken, and there wasn't enough room to do the entire thing, so I had to skip out 9 to 12, and I think we're just gonna have to assume how many people buy that many slots. Looking at the trends, I'm gonna assume that around 10% of people bought 10 to 11 extra slots. Now, the calculation that I'm about to do is essentially out of the sample of 3,300 people, I'm going to calculate how many slots they bought altogether. This calculation is a little bit tricky to explain, but I'm essentially just averaging the amount of slots that you have and timesing it by the amount of people in that group. So out of a sample of 3,300 people, they bought 12,915 slots. Dividing 12,915 by 3,300, we can see that on average, every player buys 3.9 extra slots. Now, I'm assuming that my sample size is actually representative of the entire Deepwoken player base. Maybe for whatever reason, my viewer base buys more or less slots than the average player, but I doubt that's the case, so we're going to assume that my viewer base is representative of the average Deepwoken player. So now we know that the average Deepwoken player buys 3.9 extra slots, so we simply take the amount of game sales and then times that by 3.9 to figure out how many slots were bought. In total, we can see that around 2.2 million extra slots were bought. The price of a slot is 200 Robux and the sale tax is 30%, so we do the same calculation, which is 2.2 million times 0.7 times 200. In total, they made around 314 million Robux from slots. We multiply that by 0.0035, which is the conversion rate from Robux to USD, and we get that the Deepwoken developers made around 1.1 million US dollars from slots. Now, that's not even the entirety of the transactions that are in-game. There are also race rerolls, and there's also a revive for your character once per life. To calculate these, I did the same method that I did for character slots. I simply posted a community poll, and I asked people how many times they've bought last wins and race rerolls. I did the same averaging calculations that I did for the character slots, and here is the results. For last wins, the average player buys 0.73, and for race rerolls, the average person buys 3.7. Lost Wins cost 1000 Robux and race rerolls cost 150 Robux. So multiplying the average amount that each person buys by the cost, and then adding these two numbers together, we get that players on average spend 1287 Robux on Lost Wins and race rerolls. You multiply this by the amount of players who bought access to the game and account for Roblox's tax, and you get 516,014,366 Robux. You then convert this figure from Robux to dollars, and you get $1.8 million from Lost Wins and race rerolls. So now we have estimations for all the transaction types. Let's add them together and see the total revenue of Deepwoken. Adding these three transaction types together, we get that Deepwoken has made approximately $3.5 million. Due to the amount of assumptions and statistical uncertainty of my calculations, I could be off by a large margin. I think it's safe to say that the range is between $1 to $5 million. Considering the game's only been out for like 4 months, that's incredibly impressive, and I'm sure the developers are really happy about how the game has done so far. That was a ridiculous amount of math, and I'm gonna have to thank my statistics teacher for that. If you guys learned something new, then remember to subscribe and like the video. Apart from that, I will be seeing you in the next one. Peace out.